Imagine a world without banks, without money, without borders. Now imagine something even more radical. A world without the word mine. 50,000 years ago, if you asked a human, "What do you own?" they wouldn't understand the question. Not because they were simple, but because ownership didn't exist yet. Today, we are obsessed with ownership. We measure our lives by what we have, our worth by what we own. Entire economies rise and fall based on who controls what. But here's the question no one asks. When did this start? When did a piece of land stop being just land and become my land? When did a tool stop being something you used and became something you possessed? Somewhere in our ancient past, a single idea sparked in the human mind. An idea so powerful, so transformative, that it would eventually create kings and slaves, wealth and poverty, Wall Street and Bitcoin. The first spark. From survival instinct to the concept of property. This is the story of that spark. And why it changed everything. Let's go back. Way back. For the first 200,000 years of human existence, life was brutally simple. You had one job. Survive until tomorrow. And survival meant three things. Find food, avoid danger, and stay with your group. Our ancestors were hunters and gatherers. Nomads. They moved with the seasons, following herds, tracking rivers, foraging for whatever the land offered. And here's the crucial part. Nothing belonged to anyone. When the hunt was successful, the meat was shared. Not out of charity. Not because they were inherently noble, but because that was the only way to survive. You see, in a world where you can't refrigerate food, where there's no storage, no warehouses, no way to preserve your kill for next week, hoarding makes no sense. If you tried to keep all the food for yourself, it would rot. And next time you came back empty-handed from the hunt, no one would share with you. You'd starve. Or worse, you'd be cast out. And alone on the savannah, you were dead. So early humans developed something extraordinary. Reciprocal altruism. A fancy term for a simple idea. I help you today, you help me tomorrow. This wasn't property. This wasn't ownership. This was access, temporary use, functional relationship with objects and resources. That stone tool you just used to crack open a nut, it wasn't yours. It was just a tool, a thing. When you were done, you left it. Someone else would use it next. The cave you slept in, not your cave, just a place, a shelter. Tomorrow you might sleep somewhere else, because you were always moving, following the food, chasing the seasons. And here's what's fascinating. This system worked. For thousands of generations, humans thrived without ever asking, who owns this? They had something perhaps more valuable. They had belonging, not ownership, belonging, connection to the group, connection to the land itself. But the human brain was evolving, getting bigger, more complex, more capable of abstract thought. We were learning to plan, to predict, to imagine futures that didn't exist yet. We started to notice patterns. The way certain plants grew in certain places. The way animals returned to the same watering holes. The way seasons cycled with predictable rhythm. And then, around 12,000 years ago, something happened that would change our species forever. A revolution so profound that it would shatter the ancient social contract of sharing and cooperation. A revolution that would plant the first seed of an idea that had never existed before. The idea of mine. But to understand how we got there, we need to talk about wheat. And why humanity's greatest achievement might also have been our greatest trap. Around 10,000 BCE, in a fertile crescent of land between the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, something extraordinary happened. Humans stopped moving. For the first time in our entire evolutionary history, we stayed in one place. We planted seeds. We watched them grow. We harvested them. And we did it again and again. This is what historians call the Neolithic Revolution, the birth of agriculture. And on the surface, it sounds like progress, right? No more wandering, no more uncertainty. Just plant your crops, tend your fields, and reap the rewards. But here's the thing nobody tells you. Agriculture was actually harder than hunting and gathering. Studies of ancient skeletons show that early farmers were shorter, had more disease, worse teeth, and died younger than their hunter-gatherer ancestors. Their diets were less diverse. Their workload was brutal. Planting, weeding, harvesting, it was backbreaking labor from sunrise to sunset. So why did we do it? The answer is simple, and it's the same reason humans do most things that seem irrational. We didn't have a choice. By 10,000 BCE, there were too many of us. The easy game was hunted out. The obvious food sources were depleted. Climate was changing. And nomadic life could no longer support our growing population. Agriculture wasn't a choice. It was a survival strategy, a desperate gamble. But here's what nobody predicted. This gamble would fundamentally rewire the human brain. Because when you plant a seed, something profound happens in your psychology. You wait. You invest labor today for a reward that won't come for months. You defer gratification. You plan for a future harvest. And most importantly, you develop a relationship with a specific piece of land. This wasn't just any field. This was your field. The one you cleared. The one you planted. The one you watered and weeded and protected from animals. For the first time in human history, location mattered permanently. That plot of land? You weren't leaving it next season. You were staying. You were investing in it. You were bound to it. And suddenly, a revolutionary thought entered the human mind. This land is mine. Not, I'm using this land right now. Not, our tribe camps here sometimes. But mine. Exclusively. Permanently. This was the spark. The first flicker of property rights. But it gets deeper. Because agriculture created something that had never existed before in human history. Surplus. In the hunter-gatherer world, you caught what you could eat. You gathered what you could carry. There was no concept of extra because there was nowhere to put it and no way to preserve it. But farming changed everything. You could harvest more grain than you needed for today. You could store it, save it, accumulate it. And the moment you have surplus, you have something else. Inequality. Because not everyone's harvest was the same. Some people had better land near water, rich soil, perfect sunlight. Some people were stronger, worked harder, or had more family members to help with the labor. Some people ended up with full granaries. Others barely scraped by. And for the first time in human history, you could see the difference. You could measure it. You could count it. Literally. That guy over there has 3 full storage pits. You have 1 half-empty one. That family has enough grain to last 2 years. Your family might not make it through winter. Surplus created comparison. Comparison created envy. Envy created the need for protection. Because if you spent 6 months growing grain, and you managed to store enough to feed your family through winter, the last thing you wanted was someone else taking it. So you built walls, fences, boundaries. You marked your territory. You defended it. And other humans, for the first time in our species' history, became potential threats to your resources. Not just lions or wolves or natural disasters. Other people. The social contract was breaking. Sharing had been the default for 200,000 years. But now there was something worth not sharing. Now there was something worth fighting for. The land you cultivated. The grain you stored. The house you built. These weren't just objects anymore. They were extensions of your labor. Your time. Your life. They were yours. And protecting them became a matter of survival. This psychological shift cannot be overstated. Our brains were literally rewiring themselves. The neural pathways that once prioritized group cooperation were now balancing against a new imperative: individual accumulation. We were still social creatures. We still needed community. But now we also needed to protect what was ours from that same community. It was a tension that had never existed before. and it's a tension we're still living with today. So let's talk about what was happening inside the human brain during this transformation. Because ownership isn't just a legal concept. It's a psychological one, and it's deeply, almost disturbingly primal. There's a famous experiment that behaviorists love to run. They give a child a toy to play with for just a few minutes. Then they try to take it away. What happens? The child screams, cries, fights to keep it. Why? It's not even their toy. They just got it. They've had it for 3 minutes. But already their brain has formed an attachment. Already it feels like mine. This is called the endowment effect, the psychological phenomenon where we value things more simply because we possess them. It's irrational, but it's hardwired into us. And 10,000 years ago, when agriculture was forcing humans to attach themselves to specific plots of land, this psychological quirk became essential for survival. If you didn't feel attached to your land, you wouldn't defend it. If you didn't defend it, someone would take it. And if someone took it, you'd starve. So evolution favored the people who felt possessive, the people who drew boundaries, the people who said, "This is mine, and I'll fight to keep it." The psychology of ownership wasn't just cultural. It was biological. But here's where it gets really interesting. Once humans started marking boundaries around land, they started marking boundaries around everything. Your tools, your house, your stored grain, your animals, and eventually, your people. Women became property. Children became property. Even other humans, slaves, became property. The spark that started with "this land is mine" became a wildfire that consumed entire categories of human relationships. But let's be clear about something. This wasn't inevitable. This wasn't human nature expressing itself. This was scarcity expressing itself. Because here's the pattern. Ownership intensifies when resources are limited. When there's abundance, humans share freely. Think about air. Nobody owns air because there's plenty of it. Nobody fights over oxygen. But water, land, food, the moment these become scarce, boundaries appear. And agriculture ironically created scarcity. Before farming, the whole world was your resource base. You moved freely across vast territories, following abundance. After farming, you were trapped on your small plot. And if that plot failed drought, flood, locusts, disease, you couldn't just move to where the food was. You were stuck. Your survival depended entirely on a few acres of land and what you could make them produce. So you protected those acres with everything you had. You built fences. You dug ditches. You placed markers, stones, posts, walls. And you developed rituals around ownership. Early property rights weren't written down. There were no lawyers, no contracts, no deeds, but there were witnesses. When you cleared a field, the community saw it. When you built a house, everyone knew it was yours. When you harvested your grain, the boundary between your surplus and someone else's was clear. Social memory became the first property law. That field? That's been OG's family's field for 3 generations. Everyone knows that. And if you violated that unspoken rule, the community enforced it, not with police or courts, but with social pressure, ostracism, violence if necessary. Property rights emerged not because some king declared them, but because communities needed a way to prevent constant conflict over resources. The alternative was chaos, endless fighting, cycles of theft and revenge. So humans created an invisible system of boundaries, and we taught our children to respect them. Don't take what isn't yours. This is ours. That is theirs. Stay on your side of the line. These aren't just moral lessons. They're survival instructions for living in a world of scarcity. And once those boundaries were drawn, once the psychology of mine was embedded in human culture, something else became possible. Something that would change civilization forever. Trade. Because if I own this and you own that, we can exchange them. And the moment exchange becomes possible, value stops being about immediate survival and starts being about something else entirely. status, power, wealth. The game had changed. Let's imagine you're a farmer in ancient Mesopotamia, around 6000 BCE. You've had a good harvest. Your granary is full. You have more grain than your family can eat before next season. Across the village, there's a man who's exceptionally skilled at making clay pots. Beautiful, durable vessels that can store water, grain, oil far better than the crude containers most people make. You need pots. He needs grain. So you approach him with an offer. I'll give you 3 bushels of my grain for 2 of your pots. He considers. He agrees. You shake hands. And in that moment, something miraculous just happened. You didn't just exchange objects. You exchanged value. Abstract, calculated, negotiated value. Your grain wasn't worth 3 bushels. It was worth 2 pots. His pots weren't worth 2 pots. They were worth 3 bushels. Value had become relative, fluid, negotiable, and this changes everything. Because once humans start trading, ownership stops being just about survival. It becomes about accumulation. Think about it. In the old hunter-gatherer world, there was no point accumulating anything. You couldn't carry it. You couldn't store it. And even if you could, it would rot or break. But in an agricultural society with trade, suddenly accumulation makes perfect sense. That extra grain you don't need, don't let it rot. Trade it for pots, or tools, or cloth, or animals. Those things you traded for, trade them again for something else you need. Or better yet, something you can trade later for even more. You're not just surviving anymore. You're investing. You're building wealth. And here's where human psychology takes another dark turn. Because the moment you can accumulate more than you need, the question becomes, how much is enough? For survival, maybe 3 months of stored grain. But what if there's a drought next year? Better store 6 months. What if there's a war? Better store a year's worth. What if you want to trade for that beautiful necklace your wife has been eyeing? Better store even more. What if you want your children to inherit something? Your grandchildren? Suddenly, there's no upper limit. There's no enough. Because accumulation isn't just about survival anymore. It's about security, about status, about legacy. And humans, it turns out, are really, really bad at knowing when to stop accumulating. This is where social hierarchy enters the picture. In hunter-gatherer societies, there were leaders, sure, elders, skilled hunters, wise decision-makers, but their status was earned through ability and maintained through generosity. The best hunter shared his kill. The wise elder shared his knowledge. Status was temporary, fluid, based on what you did, not what you had. But once ownership and trade emerge, status becomes storable. The man with the biggest granary isn't just secure for this season. He has leverage. He has power that persists even when he's too old to farm. He can lend grain to neighbors in exchange for labor. He can demand a share of their harvest in return. He can choose who gets his surplus and who doesn't. Wealth becomes hereditary. His children inherit the full granary. They start with an advantage other children don't have. They can trade from a position of strength. They can accumulate even more. And within a few generations, you have something that never existed in human society before: permanent social classes. The wealthy, the poor, the powerful, the powerless, all because of that first spark, the idea that this is mine. Now, let's talk about something fascinating: the first luxury goods. Because once basic needs are met, once you have enough grain to survive, human psychology does something predictable and kind of absurd. We start wanting things that have no survival value whatsoever. Jewelry, decorative pottery, fine clothing, rare shells from distant shores. Why? What's the point of a necklace made of polished stones? It doesn't feed you. It doesn't shelter you. It doesn't make you stronger or faster or safer. But it does something else. It signals. It says, I have so much surplus that I can afford to trade valuable resources for something completely useless. I'm not worried about surviving next winter. I'm beyond that. This is called conspicuous consumption, and it's one of the most powerful social forces in human history. The wealthy don't just want to be wealthy. They want everyone to know they're wealthy. So they wear rare shells. They build bigger houses. They throw elaborate feasts. They acquire exotic goods from faraway lands. And everyone else sees this and thinks, that's what success looks like. That's what I should aspire to. Suddenly, value isn't just about utility. It's about scarcity and signaling. That rare blue stone from a mountain 300 miles away is not valuable because it's useful. It's valuable because it's rare and because owning it proves something about you. This is the birth of symbolic value, and it's absolutely crucial to understanding modern economics. Because symbolic value is subjective, arbitrary, completely detached from function, and yet humans will work themselves to exhaustion to obtain it. This brings us to another revolution: specialization. Once trade becomes common, you don't need to be good at everything anymore. You can be exceptional at one thing and trade for everything else. You're an amazing potter? Great. Make pots. Trade them for grain, meat, cloth, tools, everything you need. You're a skilled metalworker? Even better. Metal tools are rare and valuable. You can command premium prices. You're a talented storyteller? Interesting. People will feed you just to hear your tales. You're providing entertainment, meaning, cultural value. Suddenly society becomes complex. You have farmers, craftsmen, builders, traders, priests, warriors, artists, administrators. Each person owns their skills, their tools, their products, their time, and they trade these things in an intricate web of exchange. This is no longer a tribe. This is an economy. And with economy comes something that sounds boring but is actually revolutionary: record keeping. Because once trade becomes complex, memory isn't enough. Wait, did you already pay me back for those 3 pots? Or was that your brother? I gave you grain last month. You owe me a goat. No, 2 goats. Or was it 1 goat and a basket of dates? You need to track debts, credits, obligations, agreements. So around 3200 BCE, in Mesopotamia, humans invented something that would change our species forever: writing. And what were the very first written documents? Not poetry, not prayers, not love letters, receipts, accounting records, lists of who owned what, who owed whom, what was traded for what. The first written human language was literally created to track property. Think about that. Writing, one of humanity's greatest intellectual achievements, emerged because ownership had become so complex that we needed a permanent record of it. Clay tablets with cuneiform script listing: Enki owns 12 goats and 40 bushels of barley. He owes Nana 3 silver rings by the next full moon. Property was now so important that we invented a technology just to keep track of it. And once you have writing, you can create something even more powerful: contracts, formal agreements, witnessed, recorded, enforceable. I, Gudea, sell this plot of land to Uarnamu for 20 silver shekels. Witnessed by the temple priest and recorded on this day in the 20th year of the king's reign. Property wasn't just psychological anymore. It wasn't just social custom. It was documented, official, legal. You could now own something so completely that even if you died, the ownership transferred according to rules you specified. Your children inherited not just your possessions, but your legal right to those possessions. Ownership had become institutional, and institutions, once created, become extremely difficult to dismantle. Because now you have priests managing property records, kings enforcing property laws, courts adjudicating property disputes, armies protecting property boundaries, entire civilizations organized around the concept of mine and yours. The spark had become a bonfire. So let's step back and look at the journey we've taken. 50,000 years ago, humans owned nothing. We shared everything. We moved freely across the land, taking what we needed, leaving what we couldn't carry. Then, 12,000 years ago, we planted seeds. We stayed in one place. And for the first time, we said, "This is mine." That single psychological shift from sharing to owning created everything that came after. Social hierarchy, trade, specialization, cities, kingdoms, empires, writing, law, banking, currency, stock markets, corporations. Every economic system in human history traces back to that first moment when a farmer looked at his field and thought, "This belongs to me." But here's what's truly mind-bending. We're still living in that same paradigm. Right now, in 2026, the global economy is worth roughly $100 trillion. Every single dollar of that represents ownership. Someone owns something, product, a service, piece of land, a share of a company, patent, copyright, a cryptocurrency. The stock market? It's just a sophisticated way of trading ownership claims. Real estate? Same concept as ancient Mesopotamian land ownership, just with more paperwork. Intellectual property, the idea that you can own not just physical things but ideas themselves. Thoughts, innovations, creative works. We've extended the concept of property to absurd extremes. You can own a song you've never heard. You can own a company you've never visited. You can own a fraction of a building you'll never see. You can own digital tokens that exist only in computer code. And people will spend their entire lives working to accumulate these abstract ownership claims. Why? Because that ancient psychological circuit that evolved 12,000 years ago is still firing. Accumulate, protect, secure, leave a legacy. We can't turn it off. It's wired too deep. But here's the question we need to ask. Is this still serving us? Because remember, property wasn't inevitable. It emerged as a response to scarcity. When resources are limited and populations are growing, ownership prevents chaos. But what happens when scarcity is no longer the constraint? We live in a world where we produce enough food to feed 10 billion people, yet a billion go hungry. Why? Distribution, access, ownership. We have enough housing for everyone, yet people sleep on streets. Why? Property rights, prices, exclusion. We've created artificial scarcity in a world of potential abundance because our economic system, built on that 12,000-year-old concept of property, requires scarcity to function. If everyone has access to everything, nothing has value. If nothing has value, there's no trade. If there's no trade, there's no economy. At least not as we understand it. So we maintain scarcity. We enforce boundaries. We protect ownership. Even when it would be more efficient, more humane, more logical to share. Because the system that saved us from chaos 10,000 years ago has become the system we can't imagine living without. And yet, things are changing. Again, the digital age is doing something strange to the concept of ownership. Information wants to be free. A song can be copied infinitely at zero cost. A book can be shared with 1 million people instantly. Software can be open source, built collectively, owned by no one and everyone. The old rules of scarcity don't apply to digital goods. And this is creating tension. The music industry spent decades fighting file sharing because it violated property rights. But the technology didn't care about property rights. Cared about what was technically possible. Now we have Netflix, Spotify, subscription models where you don't own anything, you just have access. We're moving backward, in a sense. Back toward a sharing model. Not because we're more enlightened, but because the technology makes ownership cumbersome. Why own a DVD when you can stream any movie? Why own an encyclopedia when Wikipedia exists? Why own software when cloud-based tools are always up to date? And then there's cryptocurrency, digital assets built on blockchain technology. The entire point is to create provable scarcity in the digital realm. This Bitcoin is mine. This NFT is mine. The blockchain proves it. It's humanity's desperate attempt to impose ancient property concepts onto a medium that naturally resists them. Will it work? I don't know. But what I do know is this: we're at an inflection point. The spark that ignited 12,000 years ago, the idea that resources can be owned, controlled, accumulated, that spark is being challenged by technologies that make abundance possible. And we have to decide, do we cling to the old system, or do we imagine something new? Because here's the uncomfortable truth. Property rights were never about fairness. They were about stability, about preventing constant conflict over scarce resources. But if we solve scarcity through technology, through automation, through new economic models, do we still need property as we've known it? Or can we return to something closer to our original human experience? Not primitive scarcity, but technological abundance shared communally. I don't have the answer. Nobody does. But I'll leave you with this thought. For 200,000 years, humans thrived without the concept of ownership. We cooperated. We shared. We belonged to each other. Then, for 12,000 years, we've organized society around property. And it's given us incredible things: cities, science, art, technology. But it's also given us inequality, exploitation, environmental destruction, and the constant anxiety of never having enough. So maybe the question isn't, what do we own? Maybe the question is, what owns us? Has the system we created to serve our survival become the master we now serve? And if we could redesign society from scratch, knowing everything we know now, would we choose property? Or would we choose something else? I'll let you sit with that, because the future of ownership, the future of everything, is being written right now. And whether we realize it or not, we're all holding the pen.